serious, didn't it?
Okay, got it.
Good deal. All right, well, it's good to see you after a few hours of sleep, I guess, that you had. Again, I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you being here and participating in this process. And as I've said often, I trust that the Lord will use this to, in some ways, develop within all of us maybe a better understanding of some of these more grueling things that we deal with in the church. So thank you for being here, and I appreciate it so very much. Just to break down today real quickly before we get started, essentially what will take place, like I said last night, we'll have sessions 5 and 6, and of course I break them down by the hour typically. If you figured out by now, that's something you've learned if nothing else. And then after sessions 5 and 6 are done, everybody will be dismissed except for the ministry subcommittee. That will be where we begin to collaborate. At that point, for the next, including the ministry subcommittee, the next 5 meetings will be just with the subcommittees. Your subcommittee's on the front of your binder. If you haven't already discovered that or learned about that, it'll be broken down right underneath your name. And so in that, your schedule in front of your binder, which we've already sort of went through that. I'll go through that in depth today just so we understand our times that we'll be meeting, and if there's any misunderstanding, we can try to take care of that. So we'll begin the collaboration today and see where that takes us, what that looks like, and then ultimately that will culminate in hopefully some sort of document manual that will have everything from table of contents all the way to the end. It'll be unique, as we talked about, contextual to Beulah. I've got Trace Creek's policies and procedures. I've got Lone Oak First Baptist policies and procedures. And while they're good, they're not us. And what they do won't work here. It just won't work. And same principles, but we're just a different creature. And if things that we have in a document we're not doing, we scrap those. And so we'll be discussing some of those things, some of the things that we've even had in a document. One of those I mentioned, I think the first 2 sessions, was a nursery policy and procedure that I found up in the cabinet that was adopted from another church. I don't know if you ever voted on that or not, but the nursery policy and procedure does not even come close to doing how we do church here. And if we tried to lay that document down on our nursery, it would just be like a foreign language. I mean, our nursery workers, honestly, they wouldn't submit to it because it's so far gone, you see. And so part of the creation of this document is understanding that contextual aspect. We have to create things or develop something that, even if it is stretching us, we'll be able to fall into and follow, instead of some kind of bizarre, big document that everybody just looks at and said, I'm not doing that, you see. And so it's a process. I mean, you think about the life of the church and the revisability of this, we're the beginning, I hope, of something that 25 years they'll look at and that maybe they'll be more refined and more adapted. So anyhow, so that's kind of what we're getting into today, sessions 5 and 6. You've got it in your manual, but of course I put everything up here on the PowerPoint. You'll have some fill in the blanks if you want to follow in, but for the sake of your understanding, we'll be starting in session 5, and it should be in your binder that you've got before you. So as I said last night, I repeat it, the fundamentals of policy and procedure development. This is part 1. So you've already done the pre-test. Here's a couple quotes here. One is from my friend and mentor to me that helps me understand things. This is a tweet that he put out several months back, and when he sent this tweet out, I sort of sent a reply to him and said, buddy, I think that just fits right up in what I'm dealing with. But Pastor Dan Summerlin said one of the positives about facing problems is that they bring clarity to what is most important. One of the positives about facing problems is they bring clarity to what is most important. And this is from yours truly right here in Carico. When I think about my ministry, I have yet to have an argument in ministry over evangelism or discipleship. I haven't had one argument yet with anybody over evangelism or discipleship. But what I have discovered is that most of the conflict that I've experienced in ministry comes from the area of administration. It comes from some sort, as we're going to talk about today, like a marriage, like a friendship. It comes from a lack of communication. It comes from unmet expectations from others upon me or upon the church. And that could be from the community looking into the church. That could be within the church looking at other people in the church. Been a lack of understanding. And quite simply, if there would have been a process in place, whether it would be a simple job description or a simple policy regarding perhaps change in the church, just something simple, that would have resolved some conflict, because it would have forced us to look at a common document to say, well, let's go and see what we're looking at here, and let's try to have some understanding, okay? And so, wow, a lot of things I've experienced conflict with, good, bad, or different, comes from this area of administration in a big, broad way, and in, of course, every case, a specific way, but under that umbrella. And so what we've done here, I started out, and just when you think about the development, policy and procedure, or administrative resource, if you want to call it that, I immediately want to talk about the struggles that we will have in this, okay? It's the struggles I think that every church has, but it's the struggle that either we'll have from spiritually looking at it, and please give feedback on some of these. I want that. I'm thinking about that, and I want to document it. I'm looking to learn way more than I'm trying to dish out to you for my own personal edification and for just this idea of what administration of the church looks like. And it could be some example that you have. Maybe it's something happened in the church. That's why you're here. If something's happened in the past, and you don't have to use specific names, but you can use a scenario. Help us all understand some of this, okay? But when you think about the struggles of church policy and procedures, and doggone it, I'm telling you, there is a lot of struggles when you think about this. And it may, in some ways, just to be honest with you, it is kind of like climbing a mountain. When you get a rural, traditional, established Southern Baptist church that's been in existence for 155 years, to try to somewhat change the way they look at things, that's a struggle. That could be like climbing a mountain. And then again, that's partly why you're here, is to sort of help in that journey. But generally speaking, the church has been known to view policies, procedures, and even planning, in my research and study, in some ways somebody in the church will view that as a sin, or at most, and maybe at least, just an exercise in futility. What I mean by that is some people view policy and procedure as, why are we doing that? We've never had to do that before. Just let God run the church, and we'll just sit in the pew, and we'll just do ministry, and we'll deal with things as they come. That's been sort of an understanding, maybe not, you may not think that, but it has in church history. When you think about trying to do what we're trying to do, some people look at it as, this is just, this is futile, whatever the case may be. In many churches and Christian organizations, planning with policy and procedures is akin to sin, because the belief that, quote, planning prohibits moving in the Spirit. And that's this theological discussion you could always have, is how far do you go to the point that you prohibit the freedom, the immediate freedom to do whatever the church feels, versus having, as Brother Steve said last night just wonderfully, having a guideline and a boundary that will help us understand. And,
Well, and as you said last night, we can go have a business meeting and make an adjustment too.
Yeah. I mean, it's the revisability of this thing, I think, is the beauty of it. That's what allows me to breathe, honestly, is that this is not like the Word of God, that once a church would vote on it, or once a church would adopt it, that, oh my gosh, it's never going to change. That would actually be dangerous for us to think that. Generally speaking, there's this concept of sin. So I've broken this down into three struggles. The first one, of course, I mentioned is theology. What I mean by that is, of course, theology is about God. It's the concept of God and the character of God. But in that, you see that if God is sovereign, then why should we plan? Okay, and this is a big spiritual discussion we have, but I think it involves this idea of administrative resources. Of course, the great Charles Haddon Spurgeon, he said this. He said, planning was important, but one must always recognize God's sovereign leading in any plans that one makes in this life. And so Charles Spurgeon was a great Baptist preacher, just a great man of God. A lot of things are written about him in history. He made a great difference in the kingdom of God and in the church. But in that, he says, you and I ought to pull a chair up to the table. You know, we ought to think about planning. But there ought to be a footnote in all of that. And the footnote is, as God leads us, and as God changes us, and as we allow ourselves for God to change us and shape us, then only God can determine what a document like planning would look like. Same way with planning a mission trip, same way with the discipleship. Only God knows, Beulah, what this church will look like in 25 years. Only He does. We had a little meeting after the meeting last night talking about, space in the church and growth in the church. I mean, will God bring 500 people to Beulah Baptist Church? He could. And if He does, you better believe that a lot of the things that we're talking about now will perhaps could be irrelevant at that point. And you would have to reshape and rethink as the Spirit of God leads. But that doesn't excuse, in my opinion, I believe in the Scriptures, and even a part of the struggle, it doesn't excuse us from not thinking about what is a plan, what's organization, what's administration. Planning ministry, utilizing policies and procedures can help advance the kingdom of God, all the while under the moving of the Spirit. These protocols, if you will, if they're used properly, they'll not get ahead of God or undermine His will for the church or Christian organization. Since God does all things decently and in order, and we talked about that last night, the biblical rationale for all of this, I believe He does things decently in order, and I believe that He would expect us to do that as well. Actually, you could make the argument that not deploying or not thinking about policy and procedures is allowing everyone to do what is right in their own eyes, and in that is contrary to the Word of God. And so I would make the argument to anybody that may say, well, it just prohibits the moving of the Spirit, it gets ahead of God. I would say, well, if God is a God of order, then, if we don't plan, if we don't organize, then what that means is you've got 140 people in the church that has different expectations of everything in the church, and when something trips or goes wrong, then you've got 139 different opinions over that one person or over a group of people. And then you just open up this opportunity for, who, Satan, to come in. And one of the things we discuss, and that's why I hope all this fits together as you see going through this, one of the great blessings from God at Beulah Baptist Church has been our ability to adjust through hard times. Honest to goodness, there's been at least 2 times since I've been here, just to be real candid with you, at least 2 times in this church that it could have ended very, very badly. And I'm just being very honest with you. It could have ended very, very badly. But by the grace of God, by His grace and by the grace of God, we were able to sustain and in some ways for a season limp through some of the things that could have been prohibited for good or bad or indifferent. Whether we had a document or not, I don't know if that would have helped or not, but I do know it would have significantly decreased the conflict we had. Just no doubt about it, because it's not he said, she said. And maybe if you were standing in my shoes, some of you stood in certain shoes that had to deal with some of this, then you'd understand what I'm talking about. Because when you're receiving text messages, you're having conversations, you're trying to piece together, well, I think he means this, or I think this is what's supposed to happen, and it just causes confusion. So you see what I'm saying? Beulah has been blessed in that we've been able to adapt and change, limp through. And so in that, I think that not deploying something, as simple as it may be, would be actually contrary to the Word of God. One of the second struggles we have is the treatment. We discussed some of this last night, and add a little verbiage to sort of help in this. Not only the theology, but how do we treat a document? Okay, we're just going to open it up. This is going to be sort of the practical stuff of the development of this. How do you treat a document? you know. And so what we got here, any attempt of developing and implementing policy has resulted, in some cases, an out-of-date document. That's one of the first struggles that you'll have, is an out-of-date document, okay? And when you've got an out-of-date document that doesn't match the ministry that you're currently in, the document is ineffective. You see what I'm saying? It would be just as good not to have anything than to have an old document that doesn't fit the church. Okay? You see what I'm saying? So one of that is just being simply out of date. I found one of the documents I found up in the filing cabinet was a bus ministry policy. We don't even have a bus ministry anymore. So we would have to consider at that point, is it best for us just to remove that because we don't do that anymore? Or is it best to maybe put it in the appendix of a policy and procedure? I mean, this is the formal talk of all this, but you got to understand that. You see where I'm going with this. If you do ministry for 25 years and you never remove anything, you know what you're going to have? An encyclopedia, and you know what's going to happen? Forget that. We're a bus ministry. What's this doing in here? A flyer ministry. What's this doing in here? You see what I'm saying? I mean, so an out-of-date document, if you treat it like that, and the church doesn't attempt to somewhat keep it up to date, whether that be yearly, every 6 months, whatever the case may be, it's just ineffective. Of course, the second part would be treating it as a legal document, and we'll talk about it down here with legalism. But when you treat a document like we're talking about as it's a legal document, what it does in that case is it neglects a spiritual understanding of who we are as a church. It neglects who we are as a people of God. And here, isn't this a great, interesting point that we make here, considering what we just talked about? It really neglects the moving in the Spirit of God, which may contradict what I said, but when you have a legalistic document that says this is a way we operate, and doggone it, there is no grace at all in this. And it doesn't matter what God says, we're doing this. And then you move it in front of the Bible, you treat it as a legal binding document in the church that really holds people hostage. And what it'll just produce a cold environment, just to be straight honest with you. It'll produce a cold environment, and you won't attract any new members because we'll become that church that is run by the bylaws. And there's plenty of those out there. If you haven't heard about those, they're out there that, they live and die by the bylaws. They don't hear much about the Bible. So I want Beulah to be more about the Bible in conversations than it is about a document. And so that's a struggle. That's a struggle that you'll face, I face, and that we'll face as a church. And lastly here, to have administrative resources and not honor them, that's a futile effort there. If we have something and we put it in the drawer and Beulah Baptist Church doesn't operate by it, again, we've enjoyed some chocolate and lasagna and donuts and maybe had a decent time, but outside of that, we haven't accomplished much at that point if it just sits around and is not honored. Of course, then legalism, when a church has written documentation and it takes the place of the Bible and grace, that's a struggle. The imperative is that we live from the Word of God and that we always will model grace when needed. Okay? So how do we overcome these obstacles that we have? Well, I've got 3 here. They're all in the context of striving to do this. And I hope you being here helps in this. Number one, we got to strive to validate biblical principles. Always, we got to strive to validate biblical principles. And that's why you're here. You're sensitive to the Spirit of God. You're sensitive to what God has said in His Word. I mean, let's be humble about all this. What if somebody goofs up? What if somebody doesn't follow the policy procedure? What if this happens? What if that happens? We're still mandated by the Word of God to exercise forgiveness, to exercise restoration. That's the whole point of church discipline, Matthew chapter 18. It's not to axe somebody. It's not to kick them out of the church. The point of that is to restore them back into the church. It's not to, we're getting rid of you. It's in love, we're saying you need to come back to God. You need to come back to the biblical standard. And so church discipline, of course, you don't hear about that much, and but those that practice church discipline the right way, it's always in the redemptive context. We love you, brother. We love you, sister. You know, you're not honoring who we are as a church. So, you know, my pastoral professor in seminary, you know, Jesus doesn't give a time frame in church discipline. So it may be that you tell somebody you can't come to the Lord's table because you're living in sin. And we desire that you repent of that sin, that public sin that you're living in, because you're not honoring God, you're not honoring the church. And the idea in that is not to throw a stone, but it's to say, come back to the fold, brother. Come back to the fold, sister. You walked out. And that's in the Bible, you see. And that scares some of us to death to think we'd ever have to do that. But it's a biblical practice, and it's something
Did you find anything in the church minutes about only church members could take the Lord's Supper?
I did not find anything
It used to be
specific.
announced before we took it here years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the whole idea of, and the same thing, of course, that's not in the context of what we're doing here, but in church membership, even that in the whole baptism, you know, issue, which is sort of a issue that we deal with in this area that no other church deals with pretty much in America, to be honest with you. You know, some of the issues that we have here, we didn't have those issues when I lived in Missouri. But that's a good point. Some people do what they call, you know, closed communion or fencing the table, so to speak, in a kind of a Bueller terminology. Fence the table in the sense that only church members can take it. You know, sort of the trickle-down effect in that you deal with is, you know, if you honor that and you don't honor other things in the church, then you don't model integrity, you see. So if you're not going to practice church discipline from top to bottom, then it's hard to start at one point and say we're doing this, you see. And that's just, in some ways, a struggle that the church has had for a long time. But if you're going to do it, you almost got to do it right to fully be able to stand on truth. If not, what's going to happen is you're going to have somebody come back against you and say, well, what about this? You know, you're allowing this person to be a member of the church, and, you know, they're living in open sin, and they're a member of the church, and they're getting to take this communion, but you got somebody that calls themselves a Christian, they're a body of Christ, and they go to Milburn Baptist Church, and they're one of the most exemplary Christians on the face of the planet. And you know that as much as you can tell, you know, they come to the table and they want to participate in the Lord's table and the Lord's Supper, and then you say, well, you can't. But then you got a church member living like the devil, and we say, well, he can. And then you get into this debacle. So that, I mean, that's a part of some of the struggle that you deal with, and so you almost open up a whole other can when you enforce certain things and not others. So, you know, when you talk about a functional day-to-day operation manual like we're looking at here, you would think about the biblical principles always. And I've got just some real silly comments that are, I think, ought to be examined. You got to calm down. You got to step back, and you got to understand the narrative of God's work in the ministry. And that's always the biblical rationale. It's always redemption. When you think about the struggles, I think we got to strive to be contextual. What policies and procedures that we have, we must stick to them. Okay? Yeah.
So at this point in time, Beulah believes in open communion, right?
That's what we practiced. I mean, by the practice of kind of the way we presented it. You know, I've got an opinion on it. The church, of course, would say one thing, and of course we would, in some ways, practice another thing. You know, but I think by and large, yeah. I mean, that's because somebody's got to enforce that policy, and if we don't enforce it, then it's no good. So does it come from my word, or does it come from the deacons that pass out? You know.
Back to the open sin and that person,
Yeah.
it doesn't need to take, how do you enforce it when it's being passed out?
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
how do the deacons
Yeah.
enforce it?
Yeah.
How do you take care of it in in front of the situation, in front of the Lord, I mean, like before.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean-
Brother Ian always gives that time, if you know you're not
This is kinda like the
getting off
supervisor.
on something else, but
Yeah, no, that's not, no.
if you know you're not in the will of God, you shouldn't take it.
Yeah,
You know, that should be up to that person that you're handing it.
yeah,
Yeah.
Handing it to.
yeah.
That's where that personal accountability comes in.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but then, and I'm just saying,
Yeah.
then you have somebody embarrassed because, oh, they say they're not taking it, you know.
Yeah. Well, that's
You
just
know-
personal
I know,
issue.
but I'm just saying,
Yeah, you can't worry about it. I mean, some
Yeah,
people,
yeah.
at the end of the day, you just gotta, it's an honor system.
Yeah.
It really is. Everything in church is
but
an
how
honor
do you
system.
enforce it?
Yeah.
If we're gonna have,
Well,
I'm saying, if we're gonna have a policy and procedure on how to handle the situation,
Yeah,
and we have this administrative
So,
document in place, I mean, I see, you know, we
Yeah.
have, you know, it's the honor system.
yeah,
He's telling mommy to shut up.
but for all intents and purposes, for what we're doing right now, we're not getting into necessarily church theology.
yeah, we're not getting into
This is
doctrine,
more
that's a
on
whole
the
nother.
administrative side of
Yeah.
how we just operate like our ministries and our.
Yeah.
So like, we're not getting, this one not touch
Yeah.
on baptism and.
Yeah, this would not, yeah.
That
And
would
the
be a
Lord's
whole
Supper.
different.
Yeah, that's a whole nother
Okay.
sort
Well,
of
that's what I thought,
discussion.
but when we started down that road, I thought, well, maybe I misunderstood.
Yeah, no, well, and you know, stuff we talked about, like the camp funding, you know, we've already discussed that. You know, mission trips, you know, what's the policy on funding a mission trip? Is it paying everybody's full ride, or are we doing a percentage? I mean, that's just the stuff that we'll need to discuss, and of course, when you get that down in a document, then it's pretty hard and fast. You know, then you just gotta have every committee that goes by it, you know. So, yeah, this is more of what we might call the day-to-day functions of the church, not the bigger church membership, you know, doctrinal, theological issues, although, and that's why I've got it under the struggles, even in still what we're doing, we wanna exercise grace. Something Brother Alex and I have discovered in even the camp funding, there is always an exception to nearly every rule that you have. And that's why in the policy that we drew up for the camp funding, we put this clause in there, which kind of is a big blanket at the discretion of the youth director and pastor in team together to say, here's an exceptional case, this person, blah, blah, blah. What do you think? You know, and then we can talk about that, and we can come to some sort of agreement, like, yeah, I think that's legit, you know, I mean, they've had this happen and blah, blah, blah. And then we say this would be, but the church here's the thing, the church by approving that gives us that authority to make that decision. And we don't have to fear that. If somebody gets mad at us, we say, well, the church gave us that authority. I'm sorry that you're angry, I'm sorry that you're upset. I pray that you would just help to see, you know, what we're doing here. And even if you don't, we may just have to agree to disagree. And unfortunately, one of the things in church, you know, is we're not all gonna always agree. And people is just gonna have to, there comes a point you just gotta go on in the maturity of the faith. And that's why Paul talks about that in Hebrews, even chapter number 6. You know, you guys are still on milk, you ought to be on the meat. And if you're on the meat of the word, then you're gonna understand this idea of forgiveness and grace, accountability. You see, so it comes a point we all gotta grow up, really. Not to be tried, but in the faith, we gotta hunker down and say, yeah. And that's why in this, and I appreciate that comment, because that does give some insight in even what we're doing. Because one of the struggles we talked about right here, and this is gonna be something, I appreciate your feedback because I'm recording all this. This is gonna, for all intents and purposes, this will be a research project that other churches can look into. And one of these big questions, and it's yet to be seen, it won't be at the close of what I do with this or what you do, who enforces this? You know, that's already a struggle that I see in this. And I'll report on this. And I'll have to defend my whole dissertation before a committee. and I'll have to report on what we did, and I'll have to describe what we did, and they're gonna probably drill me, and that's their job to do that, but I have to defend what I wrote. And one of the findings that I've already discovered is, how do you enforce it? And does this mean that if a church is gonna be effective, that you either A, you gotta hire somebody as an administrative guru, just throwing it out there, or that somebody in the church has to take that on as a role, a volunteer role, of being sort of this administrator in the church that helps the pastor and helps the church relay these different opinions. And churches have that. Some churches have full-time church administrators. It's the bigger churches, but I know why they do now, right? Because the only way that this can be enforced is you got to have a central, command station. And because outside of that, the pastor will never be able to keep up with all this. You won't be able to keep up with all of it. So that's a struggle I found, just to be honest with you, in this, is how do we make it work? And that's why my short answer is, that's why you're in here, is because you will help in this, to be a mouthpiece to anybody that might have a question. And if you don't know the answer, at least you'll know how to get the answer. You see, at least you'll know how to get the answer, if need be. And so we strive to be contextual, and that just means who we are at Beulah. When we sit down, we don't need, well, I'll tell you what we need. We need, I think what we need to do is we need everybody that comes to the nursery to sign into the computer in the foyer. And they need to scan their children's wrists, their wristband that they give them, and then they need to take them back. See, we don't even have that. So I would suggest to you, that wouldn't even be a suggestion for a policy. Some churches do that as a security measure. It's not gonna work at Beulah. I mean, there is something we can do perhaps, but you can't fly off the hinges somewhere because some other church is doing it. You gotta look around at who's serving too. And we'll be talking about that. And then lastly here, I cannot underscore this enough, and I know this is kind of hard. You've got to be simple with what you do. If you convolute this thing, I'm telling you, again, you've enjoyed donuts, I hope. There's some cookies back there for you to take home after the show. You had lasagna. We'll have one more meeting on the 30th. They'll feed you. And you'll say, I ate well, but everything we do will not amount to nothing if it's not simple. And I dare say if it includes page after page after page after page, it probably won't be followed. It may, but the probability of the church leaning into that becomes very hard because it's exhaustive. And simple is always better, and ding, ding, ding. That's why we're talking about the struggle of it. That's just the reality of doing what we're doing. So moving on beyond the struggle to look at the necessity and the value. What's the necessity and the value of a document? Again, you always got to understand that the size of the church should have no bearing on whether one should have policies and procedures. However, the size of the church will determine the amount of administrative resources that are needed. Okay? And so basically what I mean by this is, if you've got a church of 5 people, a simple policy would be, fine, even if it's 1 or 2 things, if a church need that. The size doesn't have any bearing, but the reality is the size of the church will kind of determine how many administrative resources that would be needed. Michael Atherton, he's a pastor of a church he pastored a church in Colorado. He's actually in Missouri now. He merged with another church. So his church merged with another church. And this is what he stated. Administration was a crucial aspect of the success of such a thing. He says administration flows through every program, person, and philosophy of the church. Can one survive without administration in the church? Perhaps for a short time. But the cost of living so haphazardly will be far greater than the cost of laying a solid and complete administrative infrastructure from the beginning. So, he tackled a big thing in that he merged with another church. So his administrative necessity was a lot more than ours, so to speak. but he testifies to this idea that it is very, very important in that.
Did you miss B?
I think you missed a slide.
Did I miss one?
Yeah, after strive to be simple.
Oh, I
The role
probably.
of church
The
policy.
role
Yeah.
of the church.
Oh,
Let me
yeah.
see.
I see what you're saying. Let me see if it's on the slides. No.
The role of church policies and procedures.
I can't believe I messed up. That's like the first time I've ever messed up in my life.
Look at you, food, aren't you?
I was perfect until I come in here. Well, that ain't no problem, cause look at what I got here.
Got your own.
Yeah, I got my own here, so. So if you look at B, let me see here. Make sure I didn't leave it out of my notes. Session 6. Session 5. Let me see, just, now I'm curious as to what I did. Probably just didn't copy and paste them, did I? Yeah, there we go. Right here it is. The role of church policies and procedures. So the role here, policy procedures, they become the media by which business processes are documented and published. They'll provide decision makers within limits, alternatives, and general guidelines, and that was, we've discussed that several times. They'll set boundary conditions, as already was discussed last night, set boundary conditions so that actions and decisions are channeled along a particular path in pursuit of an objective, and ultimately it will allow the leadership to operate without constant intervention, and once established, it will enable others to work within that framework. And so they'll be consistent and objective. There'll be consistent and objective decisions. That should be the goals of the church. So consistent and objective means that, simple being simple, black and white being black and white. In that, you see that will be the general simple role of that. And it will allow all of us, hopefully, to be able to do, if you're in a leadership role in the church, you'll be able to operate without wondering, well, I wonder what the church says about that. Now I gotta start all over again. So y'all ready? Gosh. Oh, me. I probably failed now because of that. So I have to print these out. I'll probably print these PowerPoints out and put them in the appendice of the document, but I'll probably have to go in and make an addendum to that if y'all forgive me. So back to the necessity and value of the church policies and procedures. I believe there are 7 reasons to write policies and procedures. Number 1, it just gives us an articulation of the required steps that may be necessary for a thing, whatever that thing may be. And of course, these are just sort of a grab bag. Every one of these and everything we're talking about doesn't have to, you can't be so rigid with the development of it that it just blows the desire of the document. But it will give performance measures, perhaps. Another reason to write policy procedures is, again, process consistency. Number 4, it'll serve as a training tool. That's so very important. A document can serve as a training tool. What I mean by that is if a new member comes to this church, again, we're thinking about the future. We're not just thinking about survival. We're thinking about thriving. We move beyond survive to thrive. If we have a new member come to the church, and they meet with me, or whatever the case, probably would say something to me, at least not first, the second or third person down the line, I could hand them something and say, here's the general guidelines. If it's a program in the church, and the community's a part of it, but they're not a part of the church, this is, I don't know that it's stated here, not stated here, but it will protect us. So if somebody from the community says, why are you doing what you're doing? You say, well, here's as a church we've agreed upon this. And it just gives this common conversation, this common, understanding to a community. By the way, we have a lot of people from the community that come to this church, are members of this church, that if they ever at any time began to question or doubt what we're doing, it would be very good to have something in place that we could say, this is what the church agrees on. It's not what Jonathan says, or not what Alex says, not what Alan says. This as a church we've agreed upon this. I love the idea that we could say, this is what the church has said, not this is what Ian has said. Because as soon as you personalize it, the bullseye is on your back, buddy, and you better be ready to take the heat. And I'm gonna be honest with you, maybe I'm a wimp, I don't wanna take any more heat. If I'm gonna be a part of the church, I want the church to say, this is what we're doing, this is our general understanding of it. Because we stand together, and doggone it, we'll fall together, I guess. But we need to be together on this thing, whatever it looks like. Whatever it looks like. Whether everybody wholeheartedly agrees with everything. We need to, at the end of the day, be mature in the faith, agree to disagree if we must, but to say, this is us, all right?
I think that rings strong with Upward and Center Shot and Awana, because we have out, especially with Upward, so many out community people come in.
Yeah. Well, something that, Brother Curtis brought up, and of course, this is something we'll talk about in our ministry subcommittee today. Of course, he's not here, he's not able to be here, but I'm going to bring it on his behalf. Of course, this is all of us, so this is not hidden information. One of the struggles he's had is getting payment from some people. And he's asked me, he said, how do I approach this? And I said, well, with Brother Alex and Brother Curtis and myself, when we had our meeting, we discussed some of those things. And so we hashed out kind of what it looks like. And you get into sensitive issues. But if we can somehow get something in writing, and I've got a general idea after our discussion of what that could look like if, the church wanted to do that, of trying to address stuff like that. Because you say, well, what's the big deal? Let the church pay for it. Well, the big deal is when you let this person get by with it, then this person finds out about it, and this person says, well, they don't ever pay, so why should I pay? Well, then Curtis has been held hostage over there at Awana registration. And Sabrina's got to deal with this at home. And then they get Facebook messages. Well, I'm just not going to be able to pay this year. And then now all of a sudden you went from 2 or 3 kids to 15 kids not paying. And then guess what it comes back? It comes back to the church. And then they got to bring, well, we're going to pay for all of Awana, half of Awana. Well, why are you asking, Brother Curtis? Well, some people aren't paying. And you say, well, we're fine financially. What if we're not fine financially someday? You see what I'm saying? This is a trickle-down effect that eventually finds its way to some sort of confusion. But if you have something in place that just says this is what we're going to do, at least you will have the beginning point of the conversation that says, all right, here's the deal. If you don't pay at registration, just if you're within 1 week, tell me that you need a scholarship. If you need communicate it to me. This business of, assuming I know what you're talking about, that ain't gonna work. If you need something, pull behind Brother Curtis, say, if you need a scholarship, we got people at church pay for you to be a part of this if you can't afford it. But you gotta let me know that so I can communicate it to others. You give them another week, that's a 2-week point. If they don't pay, you send an invoice in the mail. You just send an invoice in the mail and just say this, I haven't heard from you. I mean, this is the money that you owe for the Awana. If you'll just self-addressed envelope, put it in there. And then if it gets to that point, you just don't order the stuff for them. You don't order the medals, you don't order the clothes and whatnot. You see what I'm saying? Now that's saying, well, you're harsh. That's just an idea. I'm not saying that you got to do that. Maybe you say, well, I just don't want to address it at all. But what I'm getting at, where do you start? Where do you stop? You see? I mean, does everybody agree? I mean, what do y'all think about something like that? I mean, does the church just continue to pay and order stuff without anybody paying, or what do y'all think?
I've always wondered how they handled it, because they've never asked me to help, handle that part. And it is, we're our church is in a good shape right now, but, it isn't fair. And Bobby always says fair is something that comes to town once a year. Well, that's how, where do you,
I know it. Yeah.
What's the best way to handle it?
Yeah.
And communication's key.
It's key.
It's key. In church and out of church. In a family, in a marriage, everything. Communication is key. Yeah. Yeah. I agree. That's something that over time you convey to a church, and it's not something that just happens overnight,
Well, I think as a church, we have a responsibility to protect those that we've put in leadership positions, and part of that responsibility is to give them ground to stand on
Yeah,
in
it's true.
authoritative positions.
Yeah,
And so if we're not giving them any ground to stand on when it comes to situations like that, then we're not protecting them because they don't know what to do in those types of situations. And so I think as a church, it's somewhat irresponsible to not give them some sort of direction when they are in leadership positions.
yeah,
And so I think, that's why this is probably a really good, thing that we're doing, because we're not giving him the direction that he needs as a church.
right.
Because we've put him in a position, but then we're just saying, here you are, you're in a position, so figure it out. We've thrown him in a dark room without a flashlight, and we need to give him a flashlight.
Making somebody a boss and not telling them any rules.
Yeah, absolutely. We as a
You're the
church,
boss,
we
but
have a
we're gonna do what you
responsibility
do,
to
what
give
you
him
do.
the guidance that he needs so that he can be successful.
Yeah,
Because when we don't, as a church, give him that guidance, that's what leads to the burnout, that's what leads to them, later on resigning the position because they have been put in situations that have created, extreme uncomfort, and they
Yeah.
just, they burn out and they don't want to deal with those types of situations any longer. And so
Yeah.
I think we owe it to, to Alex, to Curtis, to you, to protect you guys as much as we can so that you can focus on the gospel and ministering to the kids, to the youth, and to the members of the congregation and the community.
right, yeah, I appreciate that word, that's spot
The
on,
fault
in
should
my
never
opinion.
fall on y'all, the fault,
No.
if they wanna blame somebody, they need
It's
to
the
blame the
church.
church, cause the
Yeah.
church has made the rules.
It's our
Yeah.
responsibility. You guys are in the leadership, but ultimately it's the church.
Yeah,
You guys are in the leadership, but we are the church.
right,
And so it's
true.
our job.
yeah, I
Well,
appreciate
and-
that.
We are to be good stewards of the church's money. And in
Absolutely.
doing that, whether we give scholarships or overlook, we've gotta, overlooking one or two is one thing,
Yeah.
15 is totally different.
Yeah,
And then that is, me personally would be, if I were a leader of those, it gets to be a burden on your heart.
yeah,
Okay, I've overlooked 15 kids of Wanda's
yeah,
money, should I pay that back?
right,
Well,
yeah,
then is there
And you don't want
criteria for
that.
who gets a scholarship,
Right.
yeah,
Part of my job is, I write off millions of dollars a year on my patients, but we have certain criteria that determines whether they're indigent or not.
wow,
And so, what's the criteria for a scholarship? Because, I may make six figures a year, but I don't wanna pay $25 for them to go to Awana, and so I'm
Yeah.
gonna say I need a scholarship. Well, do we have criteria that determines
Right.
whether they're eligible or not?
yeah,
I think
That's
Joey
a
can
good
do an
point.
audit.
yeah,
Brother Scott and Upward, he called.
same thing, yeah, it's.
Yeah, I mean, we've gotta have criteria in place as well.
Yeah,
But you have to remember it's a church, not a business, too.
Yeah, that's
There's
true,
an
yeah.
element of-
yeah, absolutely, yeah, you gotta figure out.
They just,
what-
they just write a check and cover the rest
Yeah.
of it.
Oh, is that what
Yeah.
happens?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a ministry, personal
I guess
ministry.
what wears on you is when you're thinking about the spiritual side of it, am I gonna push this child away,
Yeah,
Yeah, that's mine.
That's where
And
the
if you
discretion.
have a
Right,
family
where
that's
you
got,
stop. You're thinking, hey, me paying his fee or somebody volunteering,
Yeah.
make a difference.
Yeah, is
in
it
his
the
life.
kid's fault or the parents' fault?
Right.
The parent.
yeah,
if you've got a family that's got 3 kids,
yeah,
that's a bigger burden on them than it is somebody with one.
yeah,
Or if they're actually a poor family,
yeah,
like
They
she
have
said,
to-
we don't wanna not make that available to them because,
But they have to understand the rules of when they should ask for a scholarship, as you were
Yeah.
saying.
Right.
yeah,
If
And
they
probably
need
a lot of
that,
people don't know
We
that.
need to let them know that up front, that we do have that, and then
Yeah.
they have a certain criteria of time to come and.
yeah, I think you need to give them
Right,
an
I mean, it
opportunity.
can't just be a
They-
blanket
couldn't they
statement,
apply
there's
for
gotta be
that?
something.
Yeah,
You get
apply for
groundwork
that
of it.
scholarship.
yeah, that's why I thought, if you give them a week,
So, if
for-
you have
I
a
mean, that's-
reason, tell us the reason you can't do this and we'll
Yeah.
help you, but, that's like, I know Brooke couldn't,
yeah,
there's no way she could.
right,
So where it's Upward or Awana or whatever, you're gonna give parents a paper and tell them, so they would understand that.
yeah. Yeah,
Say it
well,
again.
and that's just kind of whatever, of course, the ministry subcommittee, we'll probably discuss that today and what they think. Again, this is ultimately the church's idea, so I mean, I can't lord this, I'm just throwing out my idea, my job is just, let's just see if we can all get together on this thing, I don't have all the right answers, I'm just presenting, in this case, the facts, and that's why I wanna collaborate. That's why I think the collaboration's so important, that's why you're here, is to help me understand, how do we think through this? And, you know, do you overlook it? And if that's what the church decides, then that's what the church decides. You overlook it, you just let Awana keep paying the funds of those that don't pay, and then if they don't, then it comes to the church, and then the church has got to eat the cost, and then you just live on, well, God's blessed us, and we'll just keep paying. If it gets down where we don't have any money, or we're, you know, getting behind with tithes and offerings, then you adjust at the end. I don't know. I'm just saying that's what we're here for. Is to try to look at every hard and fast issue, and, you know, in the context of the church, you know, if somebody's coming and they participate in everything else in the world, but then they use the church as just a freebie, a handout, you know, is that the way God? Is that the character of God? Is that what God expects of us? Is to be full on taking that? Well, you know, I think that Jesus laid his life down. You know, you can make an argument for that humility and just being taken advantage of. There's that aspect of it, is you just give and give and give until it hurts. But in that, you got to understand, if you give and give and give and give, then that can take away your staff positions. That's going to take away camp funding. That's going to take away other things. So it would affect at some point, if things just didn't quite were right, then it could affect. And so maybe, you know, you find the middle of the road. You know, maybe you just put a little clause in there or something. It just gently just kind of leans into it. You know, that doesn't say anything about paying anything. Maybe you just say, you know, just if you can afford it, you know, the policy is that, you know, we'll provide a scholarship from somebody in the congregation, if you'll just let us know and leave it at that. Maybe that's what you do. And you don't really enforce necessarily an invoice system, and you don't fully not order materials. You go ahead and do, you know, then that gets into the integrity of the document. That gets into the integrity of what you're doing. Well, if you're going to do it anyways, then why even say that you need to ask for a scholarship? See what I'm saying? So at that point, it'd be better to not have anything at all. This is a struggle, isn't it?
Lord, I mean, I don't think anyone could possibly question the heart of giving and generosity that our church has.
Right. No.
And I think these ministries probably do a good job conveying there is help available.
Yeah.
But if I'm just being transparent,
yeah,
I think some people who may need these scholarships, they kind of treat it sort of like they treat an unpaid bill at home. You ignore it.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not that, I don't know if it's a pride issue or if they, you know, but I mean, I don't think that we're like, well, you can't have it, but you have to ask for it. You know, we don't know you need it. All we know is there is an unpaid balance.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't think our church has ever had an issue with helping, but I think the issue's been the communication most of the time, probably from the outside, not from the inside.
Right, yeah.
Because like I said, when y'all were all talking about, you know, scholarships, I was fully under the understanding that that's always been available.
Right.
But instead of saying, hey, I need that,
mm-hmm.
they sort of ignore that, just like they ignore an unpaid, you know, bill that's not a necessity, you know, to be paid that month, and it's like, I don't have it, so I'm just not gonna pay it.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I mean, I think from the outside, sometimes it may be looked at that way as, well, I can do that some other time.
Right.
But I think it's biblical to ask for help when you need help.
Yeah.
You know, absolutely. And it is biblical it's our responsibility to take care of those who need help.
Mm-hmm.
But the issue is oftentimes, in my opinion, the communication.
Yeah.
Probably from the one in need, because we live in a society where asking for things,
mm-hmm.
you have some who have no issue whatsoever, and then you have some who have a hard time with it, and I get that. You know, that could very well be me needing an upward scholarship at some point. But, you know, I think we've got to put something in place that says if you need it, you have to ask. We have to know to help you.
Right.
And I think that's what protects. I don't think that's insensitive. I don't think that's cold-hearted. I mean, I think we're always willing to help.
Yeah.
Well, and if they need it there, that may open up another opportunity as a church.
Yeah.
Which totally is not on topic here, but, you know, another opportunity as a church for us to minister to that family in a different way.
Right.
but if we don't know, we can't do
Can't help.
either one.
Yeah,
I'm just saying for what we're doing, I think something in place.
just a
that-
general,
that in general, that requires, you know, I mean, you could go down and make it as particular as you want to, but simply just asking, I don't recall us ever turning someone away for, well,
No.
you know, your kid can't pay for Upward, or you can't pay for your child for Upward,
yeah,
so you can't come. That's never been on the table.
right,
What's on the table is, you do have to have some skin in the game. You've gotta have some responsibility. I mean, it's your responsibility to say, I can't do this.
yeah, yeah,
You know, and I don't think there's ever been an issue that we are unwilling to give.
to give, right,
If there's anything this church is willing to do, and the people of the church individually, it's give.
right, right,
I mean,
yeah. Yeah, and
They
I
have
think it's
already,
important, yeah,
There's one thing the school does, and, you know, if they want their child on the angel tree,
yeah,
they have to go to a class
huh,
to have their child on that angel tree for Christmas.
right,
At least one class at the Stars and Bars Center
uh-huh,
there at the school.
Hmm.
That holds that person accountable, and they're asking for something.
yeah,
Do we need to go to that extent? No.
right.
But that's an example,
Yeah,
is
that's-
what I wanted to give.
Something in place, yeah, yeah. And you know, some of this is, you know, just, it may not be, it could be like in a manual, but I mean, the reality of something that, I know we kinda got off on that in the ministry aspect, especially at Awana, and namely because that's right here on us. You know, that probably is more something that is on a piece of paper when they come to registration. That just tells the steps of how you're registering. You know, this is $25 fee, I don't even know how much is it? 20, okay. $20 fee, and then you've just got a list of notes. You know, if for whatever reason you are providentially hindered, to use, you know, the correct talk, please let Brother Curtis and Miss Sabrina know, and we'll be glad to, you know, assist you. And what I mean by assistance, you don't even gotta say scholarship. We know that language of scholarship. But all you gotta do on this piece of paper is just please ask us for assistance and it'll be met. And then you declare just forthright there, and you, hopefully, whatever the wording would look like, you open that door for them to get help. As a church, we would know that as a scholarship. We would know, put it in the bulletin, we need 3 scholarships or whatever. But you just list that, and that's handed to them at registration, so everybody knows. Hopefully it'll be read and communicated to a certain extent. And then that just gives them the opportunity to ask for assistance if need be. You know, if that would be a route that we have. Now, you could obviously have that in some, in a manual, obviously, that we would all understand, just so the church could see that. So, I mean, that's a struggle. I'm telling you, doing this, other churches have done it. Other churches have rules, and they're blessed by God. Just because you do this, and just because some churches are hard and fast about it, doesn't mean God's not blessing them. They're reaching people for Christ. Large churches growing fast, and they've got all this stuff in place. And honestly, a lot of them don't have money. They're living week to week on offering. And so, they've got to have these things in place because they can't afford to fund everybody's stuff. Because their budget is 0 for 0. 2 for 2. And so they've got to have this. If you don't pay, we cannot pay, and that means you won't have the material because we don't have the money. But we love you, God loves you, and we're preaching the gospel. You see what I'm saying? So they're not unspiritual because they have hard and fast rules. In some cases you look at it, you think, that old saying, more money, more problems. You got to be careful with money because it can become a point of dissension in the church. So you got to be very careful in thinking about that. And then, of course, moving on, we're about done. We'll take a break. But getting back to that helmsman idea, I want to get us back on the point of all this. Remember what the helmsman does? When things are smooth, you look ahead. And you see the horizon. Even if things now are like, that just seems too harsh. Wait a minute. It could be that you set something in place now so that when that boulder comes or when that storm comes, you're able to grab a hold of the handle and you can navigate through it without there being great great discord because of lack of confusion. So we always got to have our eyes set on what's way out there. You know, what are we looking at on down the line? What's 10 years look like for us? We got to dream together. What's 10 years look like, and what's 5 years look like, and be sensitive to that. So why should we have policy and procedures? And of course, we've already discussed this, and I appreciate, man, this discussion is awesome. It basically allows for an internal control that will inform the organizational structure of the church, and that's kind of the bottom line for any manual that you would have. It's just control. It's just a link between the internal interpretation of administration and the administrative structure. So Tish, referenced that earlier. The leadership, understanding what's required of them, the church would understand, and we would all understand and be under the same impression that this is the route we take. This is what I can stand on, and this is what I need to ask the church for approval of. If that would be something that the church would develop. If you have nothing at all, and there's no rules, and there's no enforcement of any of that. Again, I've got administrative resources, no respecter of the size of the church. The normative sized church needs them just like the large church needs them, hence the need for contextualization. One may ask, what is the real value in written policy and procedure or administrative resource? Stephen Page, let's see who that is, Page there declares that they are the lifeblood for our organization's vision and strategic direction, because what they do is they provide the framework for action and decision making. We've discussed that. If an administrative resource will provide a framework for a decision making situation that will ultimately be accountable for the whole organization. If organizations will be diligent to develop appropriate measures of the future, the lasting joy of the organized system will far outweigh the temporary pain of development. So I can already tell in this discussion, some of us are having this, how do we do this? That's this pain that he's talking about. That the short-term pain of thinking through this, I hope and trust will be for long-term joy in the church. In that, again, if nothing else, let's just say that we don't get very far at all in a resource manual. Let's just say that, I form a manual up and it's just kind of what we've had, and we don't get any new policies. The real joy in this is that at least you will have thought through it. At least you and I will have spent this time together thinking through it. And at least we'll be somewhat informed on what could be needed to be developed, okay? I think this is the last one, yeah. To reference some points from our first session, of course, I think these were on our first session, but I'll say them again. The value of a policy and procedure document or administrative resource, it forces the church, we've done that, it's forcing us to think through how we're going to operate. It will provide transparency and accountability. The more transparent we can be, ultimately the better off we're going to be. And that's in life in general, I think. And then it protects the church. It just will protect the church. When the church lets go of an employee and is later sued for wrongful termination practice, ignorance is not going to save you. In the court of law, ignorance is not going to save you. If something happened in this church and we got rid of an employee and they sued the church, where are you at then? And what if that employee come up and said, you know what, that church fired me. They voted whatever it is. I don't even know how they can change the language. But I had no job description to go by. Where are you at now, Beulah? I'm talking about a simple doc. It can be as simple as a half page, but at least you got something to say this is what we're basing it on. If you have nothing to base it on and somebody comes at the church, they're going to ask, well, where is the job description? Well, we don't have one. Well, who made the rules? Well, I don't know. The whole church, and then the church is approached, and their church said, I didn't tell them anything about it. That's that person. Y'all see what I'm talking about? Then it's he said, she said.
Preacher did it.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what happened. And then I'm left out to dry.
You gotta say, I think the deacons did.
Yeah, I know, yeah. And they're like, the deacon. But y'all get what I'm saying, right? I mean, we joke about it, but and you can't possibly get everything, but some of these big things you can for sure look at. All right, praise the Lord. Let's do a post test, and I know y'all real educated. Anybody drinking coffee's probably a really good one. There should be 4 there.